A German shepherd stranded on a treacherous cliff face. Everyone thought it was impossible to reach him. But what happened when one fearless woman decided to risk everything for a dog she'd never met? Get ready for a story that will redefine what it means to have courage and compassion. This is the incredible true story of Sarah, a rock climber who heard desperate howls echoing through Colorado's canyons and made a choice that would change 2 lives forever. Sarah Mitchell had been climbing Red Rock Canyon for 15 years, but she'd never heard a sound that made her blood run cold, quite like this one. The desperate howl echoed off the canyon walls, bouncing between the limestone faces, until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. She paused, mid-climb, her chalk-covered hands gripping the rough stone as she listened. There it was again, not a coyote, not a wolf, but unmistakably a dog in distress. Did you hear that she called down to her climbing partner Jake, who was belaying her from 60 feet below? Probably just the wind, Jake replied. But Sarah knew better. She'd grown up with dogs, trained them, loved them. This wasn't wind. This was fear. Pain and desperation rolled into one haunting cry as she rappelled down to Jake's position. The howling continued, growing more frantic. Sarah pulled out her binoculars and scanned the opposite cliff face. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rock, making it difficult to see into the crevices and ledges. Then she spotted it, a flash of black and tan fur, on an impossibly narrow ledge at least 200 feet up the sheer cliff face. "Oh my God," she whispered, adjusting the focus. A German shepherd, magnificent even from this distance, stood pressed against the rock wall. The ledge beneath its paws couldn't have been more than 18 inches wide, below nothing but a straight drop to the boulder field, above an overhang that would be challenging even for an experienced climber. "We need to call search and rescue," Jake said, already reaching for his phone. But as they watched, the dog shifted, sending small rocks cascading down the cliff face. One wrong move, one moment of panic, and the animal would fall. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Search and rescue would take hours to mobilize. Especially for an animal rescue, by then exhaustion or fear might cause the dog to make a fatal mistake. She studied the cliff face with a climber's eye, mapping potential routes. The approach would be technical, requiring a traverse across loose scree before even reaching the base of the wall, then at least a 5-10 rated climb to reach the dog's position. It was doable barely, but it would be one of the most challenging rescues she'd ever attempted. "Sarah, no," Jake said, reading her expression. "You're not seriously thinking someone put that dog there?" she interrupted. Her jaw clenched. Maybe hikers, maybe it wandered off from a campsite, but it didn't get there alone, and it can't get down alone. The German shepherd's howl echoed again. Weaker this time in that moment, Sarah made her decision. She'd spent years perfecting her climbing skills, conquering some of the most challenging routes in the country, but this would test not just her technical ability but her courage in a way no recreational climb ever had. "I'm going," she said, firmly, already mentally cataloguing the gear she'd need, call search and rescue as backup, but I'm not waiting. As she began sorting through her equipment, the morning sun climbed higher, and with it the temperature time was running out, and somewhere on that cliff face a German shepherd waited for a miracle it didn't even know was coming. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she organized her rescue gear, extra webbing carabiners, a makeshift dog harness she fashioned from climbing slings, every piece carefully selected for a rescue she had never attempted before. Jake watched helplessly as she loaded her pack, his protests falling on deaf ears. "At least wait for backup," he pleaded. "This is insane even for you," but Sarah was already plotting her route. The direct approach was impossible. The cliff face below the dog was too smooth, offering no holds. She'd have to traverse the lower band, climb the adjacent buttress, then make a dangerous swing across to reach the ledge. Her mind calculated angles and distances, while her heart hammered with urgency. The approach alone took 40 minutes. Sarah picked her way across the unstable talus field, each step sending rocks clattering down the slope above. The German shepherd had stopped howling. which worried her more than the desperate cries. Was it conserving energy, or had it given up hope at the base of the cliff? She looked up at her chosen route in full sunlight. Now the rock radiated heat. She chocked her hands, took a deep breath and began to climb. The first 50 feet went smoothly, moderate terrain she could handle with confidence, but as she gained elevation, the rock quality deteriorated. Loose flakes and crumbling holds forced her to test each placement carefully. "How's it looking?" Jake's voice crackled through her radio. "Sketchy," she admitted, pausing at a small stance to catch her breath. But doable. 2 hours into the climb, Sarah reached the crux, a blank section of rock that required a delicate traverse to reach the adjacent buttress. Her forearms burned from the sustained effort, and sweat stung her eyes. Despite the chalk, she could see the German Shepherd, now maybe 50 feet to her right, and slightly above the dog, had spotted her too. Its ears perked forward, watching her progress with intelligent brown eyes. "Hey there, boy," she called softly, not wanting to startle it. "Just hang on a little longer." The traverse demanded everything she had. Tiny crimps for her fingers, mere suggestions of footholds for her climbing shoes. One section required a dynamic move, a controlled leap to reach the next hold, as she launched herself across the gap. Time seemed to slow. Her fingers found their target gripping the edge as her feet scrambled for purchase, but the real challenge came next. To reach the dog's ledge, she'd have to pendulum swing across 20 feet of blank rock. Sarah built an anchor clipped in her rope and prepared for the most terrifying part of the rescue. She'd need to run across the vertical face using momentum to swing to the far side. "Search and rescue is still an hour out," Jake's voice informed her. "You sure about this?" Sarah looked at the German Shepherd. The dog was panting heavily, clearly distressed. The ledge beneath its paws had eroded slightly. She noticed, how much longer would it hold? "No choice," she replied, taking several deep breaths to psych herself up. The first attempt failed. She didn't commit, fully pulling back at the last second. The second attempt got her halfway, before gravity swung her back on the third try. Sarah summoned every ounce of courage. She ran across the cliff face, her feet dancing across the rock as the rope held her weight at the apex of her swing. She lunged for a hold on the far side. Her fingers latched onto solid rock. She hauled herself up, muscles screaming, until she mantled onto a small stance. Just 15 feet now separated her from the German Shepherd. The hardest part was over, or so she thought as she prepared for the final push. A new sound made her freeze somewhere above. Rocks were shifting, the cliff was unstable, and her presence might have disturbed the delicate balance. Time was running out faster than she'd anticipated. Sarah pressed herself against the cliff face as pebbles rained down from above. The German Shepherd winded, shifting nervously on its precarious perch. Each movement sent more debris cascading past Sarah's position. She had to move fast, but one wrong step could send them both plummeting. "Easy, boy," she called out, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "I'm coming to get you, just stay still." The final 15 feet looked deceptively simple, a series of large holds leading directly to the dog's ledge. But as Sarah reached for the first hold, she felt it shift under her weight. The entire section was fractured, held in place by friction alone. She redistributed her weight, moving with the delicate precision of a surgeon. 10 feet, 8 feet, 5 feet. She could see the German Shepherd clearly now, a magnificent male, probably around 80 pounds, with the classic black and tan coloring. But what struck her most were his eyes, intelligent, trusting, fixed on her with an intensity that seemed almost human. A worn leather collar hung loose around his neck, the tags catching the sunlight as Sarah pulled herself onto the narrow ledge. The dog pressed back against the cliff wall, giving her room. The ledge was even smaller than she'd estimated, barely wide enough for them both. She could feel the dog trembling against her leg, whether from fear or exhaustion, she couldn't tell. "Hey there, handsome," she said softly, slowly extending her hand for him to sniff. "My name's Sarah. Let's get you out of here." The German Shepherd sniffed her hand cautiously, then surprised her by licking her palm up close. She could see he was dehydrated, his gums, pale eyes, slightly sunken. How long had he been trapped here? Days, working carefully in the confined space. Sarah began rigging the makeshift harness. The dog remained remarkably calm, as if understanding she was there to help. She clipped him to her anchor system first. If either of them fell, now they'd fall together. "Jake, I've got him," she radioed, "but we've got a problem. He's too big to carry, and this ledge won't hold much longer." Indeed, she could feel subtle vibrations through the rock, hear the occasional crack of shifting stone. The cliff face was decomposing faster now, destabilized by her climb. "Search and rescue is 20 minutes out," Jake replied. "They've got a helicopter on standby." 20 minutes? Sarah looked into the German shepherd's trusting eyes. They didn't have 20 minutes. She made a decision that went against every principle of safe climbing. "We're going down." Now the descent plan was audacious. She'd lower the dog first while down-climbing beside him, essentially guiding him down the cliff face. It required perfect coordination and absolute trust from an animal she had just met. "This is crazy," she muttered, double-checking the harness. "You ready, boy?" The German shepherd looked at her, then did something that made her breath catch. He pressed his head against her chest, a gesture of complete trust. In that moment, Sarah felt a connection she couldn't explain. Two souls united by circumstance and courage. She began the descent, rappelling slowly, while the dog hung beside her, his paws scrambled against the rock. At first, panic flickering in his eyes, but Sarah kept talking, her voice calm and reassuring, guiding him with gentle touches. Gradually he relaxed, letting her control their descent. 50 feet down, disaster struck a massive section of cliff above them, gave way, sending car-sized boulders crashing past their position. Sarah swung them both under an overhang, pressing the dog against her body. As rocks exploded around them, she could feel his heart pounding against her chest, matching her own terrified rhythm. When the rockfall ceased, they emerged to find their original route obliterated. The way down was blocked by fresh debris. They were trapped on a small ledge, 100 feet up, with an unstable cliff above and no clear path below. "Jake, we need that helicopter now," Sarah said, her voice tighter than before. The whole face is coming apart as if to emphasize her point. Another section crumbled, sending a fresh cascade of rocks past their position. The German shepherd pressed closer to her, and Sarah wrapped her arms around him, whispering reassurances. She wasn't sure she believed herself. They were running out of options, and time was no longer on their side. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead, but the pilot's voice crackled through Jake's radio with bad news. Negative on the extraction, too much loose rock, and the downdraft could trigger a massive slide. "We need an alternative." Sarah's heart sank. She and the German shepherd huddled on their tiny ledge, surrounded by evidence of the cliff's instability. Every few minutes, another section would give way, raining debris into the canyon below the dog. She'd started thinking of him as Max, reading the name from his weathered tag, remained remarkably calm, his trust in her. Absolute, there's a traverse. Jake's voice came through, strained with worry. 60 feet to your left, there's a stable buttress with an easier descent route, but Sarah, the traverse is a cross-blank slab. No protection. Sarah studied the suggested route, 60 feet of smooth, fearless rock, angled at perhaps 70 degrees for a solo climber. It would be challenging but possible with an 80-pound dog. It seemed impossible. What about search and rescue? She asked, though she already knew the answer. They're setting up a technical rescue, but it'll take at least an hour to rig the system. The geologist says you don't have that long, the whole face could go. As if to punctuate his words, a crack appeared in the rock. Just above their ledge, Sarah watched in horror as it widened, dust and pebbles streaming out like sand in an hourglass. She looked at Max, his brown eyes meeting hers with perfect trust. How could she explain that she had to make an impossible choice, risk the traverse with him or wait for a rescue that might come too late? "I'm not leaving him," she said firmly into the radio. "Sarah, you can traverse to safety and guide the rescue team. I said I'm not leaving him." Her voice broke slightly. "We go together, or not at all." Max seemed to sense her distress. He nudged her hand with his nose, then did something extraordinary. He moved to the edge of the ledge, looking at the traverse route, then back at her. His meaning was clear. "I trust you, let's go." Sarah rigged a complex system. Max clipped short to her harness, with additional slings creating a crude support system. If she fell, they'd fall together. If she succeeded, they'd live together. There was no middle ground. The first few moves were the hardest. The slab was smooth as glass, offering only friction for her climbing shoes. Sarah had to lean far out from the wall, trusting her foot placements while managing Max's weight. The dog remarkably seemed to understand the physics involved. He shifted his weight when she needed balance, pressed close when she needed counterweight. 20 feet out, Sarah's left foot slipped for a heart-topping moment. She felt the sickening sensation of falling, but Max threw his weight against the cliff, his action giving her the split second needed to regain her foothold. They moved as one being now, predator and human, united in a dance of survival halfway across the crack above there. Human united in a dance of survival halfway across the crack above their original ledge failed catastrophically. Tons of rock peeled away from the cliff face, obliterating the spot where they'd been just minutes before the concussion from the impact nearly knocked Sarah off her precarious stance. "Go, go, go," Jake's frantic voice urged, but Sarah maintained her methodical pace. Rush meant mistakes, and mistakes meant death. Hold foot placement by careful foot placement. She traversed the impossible Satsa. Max moved with her, his paws finding purchase on tiny features she hadn't even noticed with 10 feet to go. Sarah's strength began to fail. Her forearms were pumped beyond exhaustion, her calves cramping from the sustained tension. She could see the good holds at the buttress safety, tantalizingly close, but still beyond reach. "I can't," she whispered. Her first admission of defeat. Max looked at her, then did something that defied explanation. He extended his body, stretching toward the buttress while maintaining contact with her. His action shifted their combined center of gravity just enough for Sarah to reach the next hold. Those final moves blurred together desperation, determination, and something beyond physical capability. Sarah pulled them both onto the solid buttress, collapsing in a heap. With Max on top of her, his tail wagged furiously as he licked her face, both of them trembling from the ordeal. "You did it," Jake's voice exploded through the radio. "Holy Sarah, you actually did it!" But as Sarah held Max, feeling his heartbeat against hers, she knew the truth. They had done it together. And in those terrifying minutes on the traverse, something had changed. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The descent from the buttress should have been straightforward, but nothing about this rescue had gone according to plan. As Sarah prepared the rappel, Max suddenly tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His ears swiveled forward, focused on something she couldn't see or hear. "What is it, boy?" she asked, following his gaze up the cliff face. That's when she saw them, 2 more dogs trapped on a higher ledge, a border collie and what looked like a golden retriever mix, both wearing collars, both in clear distress. Sarah's heart sank. How had she not seen them before? The angle, the shadows, they had been invisible from her original position. "Jake," she called into the radio, her voice hollow. "We've got a problem. There are 2 more dogs up here." The silence that followed spoke volumes. Finally, Jake responded, "Sarah, you can't. You barely survived getting one down." She looked at Max, who hadn't taken his eyes off the other dogs. His whine was soft pleading. These were his pack. She realized he'd been with them when whatever happened had stranded them on this crumbling cliff. "That's why he trusted me so completely," she murmured. "He knew I'd help them too." The logical part of her brain screamed objections. She was exhausted, nearly out of gear, and the cliff was deteriorating by the minute. Search and rescue was still 30 minutes from being operational. But the way Max looked at her, the desperate barks from above, logic didn't stand a chance. "I'm going up," she announced. "Sarah, no." Jake's protest was immediate. "The helicopter pilot says the whole upper section is fractured. It could go any second." She was already moving. Max beside her. The German shepherd seemed to understand what she was doing. He barked once, sharp and clear, and the dogs above responded communication. She couldn't understand but felt in her bones the climb back up was a nightmare of loose rock and crumbling holds. Every placement had to be tested twice, every move calculated for minimal impact. Max climbed beside her, his natural agility allowing him to find routes she couldn't use several times. He paused at stable stances as if showing her the way they reached a broad ledge 50 feet below the trapped dogs. From here, Sarah could see the extent of the problem. The cliff above was a death trap of fractured stone held together by luck and habit. The other dogs were on a ledge that was actively crumbling their movement, sending streams of pebbles down the face. "I need more gear," she said into the radio. "Is the rescue team close?" 15 minutes, Jake replied. "Sarah, please wait." A sharp crack interrupted him. A refrigerator-sized block separated from the cliff, missing Sarah and Max by mere feet. The impact shook the entire face, triggering a chain reaction of smaller failures. Time had run out. Sarah looked at her remaining equipment, some webbing, a few carabiners, her rope already showing wear from the earlier rescue. Not enough for a conventional rescue, but maybe Max, she said, an insane idea forming. "I need your help." What followed defied every principle of technical rescue. Sarah climbed with Max, using him as a spotter, letting his instincts guide her choices. When she reached sections too loose for her weight, Max would scout alternative routes, his four-legged stability allowing him to test holds. She couldn't. They reached the upper ledge as it was literally falling apart. The border collie was pressed against the back wall, terrified but uninjured. The golden mix had an obviously injured leg, blood on the rocks, telling a story of failed escape attempts. Working with desperate efficiency, Sarah rigged what she could. The makeshift harnesses were crude but functional. She clipped both dogs to her system, knowing her anchor wouldn't hold all their combined weight in a fall. It was all or nothing. "Max," she said, meeting his intelligent gaze, "I need you to show them the way down. Can you do that?" The German shepherd moved to the edge, looking down the route they'd climbed. He barked once at the other dogs, and something passed between them, pack communication older than human language. The descent began, Sarah managing ropes for all three dogs while down-climbing beside them. Max led, choosing the route. His calm confidence infectious. The border collie followed his lead. Trusting where Sarah could only hope, the injured golden struggled but persevered, encouraged by Max's periodic checks. Halfway down the predicted collapse began. The entire upper cliff face peeled away in a massive rock slide. Sarah swung all of them under an overhang, barely avoiding the tons of falling stone. In that moment, pressed against the cliff with three dogs depending on her, she felt something profound shift in her understanding of what was possible. They reached the buttress as the last of the upper cliff disintegrated, all of them alive, all of them together, the impossible made real through trust, courage, and a connection that transcended species. The base of the cliff felt like sanctuary after the harrowing descent. Sarah collapsed on solid ground. Three exhausted dogs piled around her. Max stayed close, his body pressed against hers, while the border collie and golden retriever mix huddled nearby. The helicopter circled overhead as search and rescue teams rushed toward them. "I can't believe you're all alive," Jake said, running up with water and emergency supplies. His face was pale, etched with the stress of the past 4 hours. "That was the most insane thing I've ever witnessed." As the rescue team began medical assessments, Sarah noticed something odd. All three dogs wore similar collars, high-quality leather with GPS tags. These weren't strays or abandoned pets. Someone was looking for them. The lead rescuer, a weathered man named Tom, examined the Golden's injured leg. "This break is at least 3 days old," he announced. "These dogs have been up there for a while. Their owner must be frantic," Sarah said, checking the tags. But the contact information was worn illegible. Only Max's tag showed a partial phone number. While the team worked, Max suddenly stood, ears alert. He barked once, then began pulling at Sarah's jacket, trying to lead her away from the group. "What is it, boy?" she asked, too exhausted to resist as he tugged her toward a cluster of boulders 50 yards away behind the rocks. She found the answer to everything. A crashed mountain bike, its frame twisted, a helmet with a significant crack, and a backpack with water bottles and dog supplies, but no human. "Oh my God," she breathed. understanding flooding through her. "Your owner, they're still out here." Max barked urgently, then took off at a run, looking back to make sure she followed. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah ran after him, calling to the rescue team. The German shepherd led them through a maze of boulders, his nose to the ground following a trail. Only he could sense they found the man in a shallow ravine, unconscious but alive. His leg was badly broken, dehydration evident, but his pulse was steady. He'd been there for days. Sarah realized the dogs hadn't abandoned him. They had stayed until the cliff collapse had trapped them, forcing them to seek higher ground. As the medical team worked on the injured man, Sarah pieced together the story. David Martinez, according to his ID, was a 34-year-old wilderness guide. He'd been mountain biking with his dogs when something went wrong. The crash, the injury, his dogs staying with him until they had no choice but to seek help. Max stayed by David's side as they loaded him onto a stretcher. The loyalty in the dog's eyes brought tears to Sarah's. These dogs hadn't been stranded by accident. They'd been trying to survive while their human couldn't help them. "He's stable," the paramedic announced. "Severely dehydrated, the leg will need surgery, but he'll make it another day," though he shook his head as they prepared for transport. David's eyes fluttered open, his gaze found his dog's relief flooding his features. Then he saw Sarah's confusion, followed by understanding. "You saved them," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Thank you." Sarah knelt beside the stretcher, Max between them. "They saved you," she corrected. "They never gave up, and when I found Max, he made sure I didn't give up either." David's hand found Max's head, tears streaming down his dirt-stained face. "Good boy," he managed. "Such a good boy." The helicopter lifted off with David and the injured Golden, while Sarah and Jake drove the other dogs to the veterinary hospital. Max rode shotgun, his head on Sarah's lap, his eyes never leaving her face. At the vet clinic, chaos erupted as David's family arrived. His wife, Maria, sobbed with relief as she hugged each dog, their 2 children. Maybe 8 and 10, clung to the border collie and Max, their joy infectious. "We thought we'd lost them all," Maria said, gripping Sarah's hands. "David's an experienced guide. When he didn't come home, we searched everywhere." The dog's GPS tag stopped working after the first day. "We think they got wet. We never imagined." Sarah learned their story. David led wilderness tours, always accompanied by his 3 dogs. They were a team inseparable. The accident had been a freak occurrence, a sudden cliff collapse that threw him from his bike. The dogs had stayed with him for 2 days before the deteriorating cliff forced them to climb higher where Sarah had found them. "Max is our oldest," Maria explained, watching the German shepherd lean against Sarah. David trained him for search and rescue. He was supposed to retire this year. She paused, studying how Max watched Sarah's every move. "But I think he's found his person." Now Sarah's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" Maria smiled through her tears. "Dogs choose their humans sometimes, and after what you did today, how could he not choose you?" 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in the hospital corridor, watching through the window as David took his first steps on crutches. Max sat by his side, tail wagging encouragement. The golden retriever, leg in a cast, watched from a nearby bed, while the border collie danced around them all. "He's doing well," Maria said, joining Sarah. "The doctors say he'll make a full recovery thanks to you." Sarah shook her head. Thanks to them, they never gave up on him. Over the past fortnight, Sarah had visited daily. She told herself it was to check on the dogs, but the truth was more complex. The bond formed on that cliff hadn't faded, if anything. It had grown stronger. Max divided his time between David's bedside and Sarah's visits, but increasingly he seemed torn. Maria said carefully. "We've been talking, David and I, about Max." Sarah's heart skipped. "Oh, he's 13, that's old for a German shepherd." David was planning to retire him from guide work anyway. And after what happened, she paused, choosing her words. "Max has chosen you. Sarah, we can all see it. He loves David, always will. But his working days are done, and he deserves to spend his retirement with someone who understands him." "I couldn't," Sarah protested weakly. "He's your family dog. He's a hero." Maria corrected, and heroes deserve to choose their path. David agrees. In fact, it was his idea through the window. David caught Sarah's eye. He nodded, a sad but understanding smile on his face. Max, sensing the attention, moved to the door, whining softly to be let out to come to Sarah. Besides Maria, added David's thinking of training the border collie to take over, younger legs for the trails. And Max! She opened the door, letting the German shepherd rush to Sarah's side. Max found his perfect human on a cliff face. How can we argue with that? Sarah knelt, burying her face in Max's fur. He smelled of antiseptic and dog shampoo. But underneath, she could still detect the wild scent of canyon stone. His tail wagged furiously as he covered her face with kisses. "You sure?" she asked, looking up at Maria. "Come in," Maria said. "Talk to David." The hospital room was bright with afternoon sun. David struggled to sit up straighter as Sarah entered Max, glued to her side. "My hero," he said warmly. "Both of you." "I'm sorry," Sarah blurted, "about Max. I never meant stop." David interrupted gently. "You saved all our lives, Max, Bella, Rusty and me. Do you know what that means to my kids? To have their dad and their dogs all come home?" He reached out, scratching Max behind the ears. "This guy is the best dog I've ever known. Loyal, brave, smarter than most humans. But Sarah, he's chosen you maybe. He knew something we didn't. Maybe he knew. He had one last mission to save his pack, and he needed the right partner to do it." Tears ran down Sarah's cheeks. "I don't know what to say. You'll give him the retirement he deserves," David said simply. "Adventures. When he wants them, a soft bed. When he doesn't. Someone who understands that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway." Max moved between them, his brown eyes moving from David to Sarah. And back in that moment, Sarah saw the decision had already been made, not by humans, but by a German shepherd who understood loyalty deeper than most. "I promise," she whispered. The next morning, Sarah signed the adoption papers. Max rode home in her truck, his head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. They drove past Red Rock Canyon, and he barked once, acknowledgement of where their story began. Sarah had prepared everything. A new bed, premium food, toys he probably wouldn't touch, but that first night, Max ignored it all. He curled up beside her bed, one paw touching her hand, where it hung over the edge in the darkness. Sarah thought about courage, about trust, about connections that transcend logic and species. She'd climbed countless cliffs, conquered fears most people couldn't imagine, but nothing had changed her like that day on the canyon wall. Max sighed contentedly. Already dreaming, Sarah watched him twitch in his sleep, probably reliving their adventure tomorrow. She'd take him hiking. Nothing extreme, just a gentle trail where an old hero could enjoy his retirement. They'd build new memories on safer ground. But tonight, they were simply two souls who'd found each other in the most unlikely place. A woman who had risked everything for a stranger, a dog who trusted completely, and a bond forged in courage that would last for all the years they had left together. Sometimes the greatest adventures don't end at the summit. Sometimes they begin when you reach solid ground and realize you found exactly where you belong. Sarah adjusted her climbing helmet, checking her gear. One final time beside her, Max watched with interest, his grey muzzle showing his age, but his eyes still bright with intelligence. "Not today, old man," she said gently. "This is a teaching day." Behind her, 6 nervous teenagers fidgeted with their equipment. Sarah had started the climbing program for at-risk youth 3 months after adopting Max. To her surprise, he'd become the program's unofficial therapy dog, sensing which kids needed encouragement, offering a paw or gentle nudge at just the right moment. Remember, Sarah addressed her students. Courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about managing fear and trusting your partner. Max barked once, as if in agreement, making the kids laugh. The tension eased, and Sarah smiled. Her climbing had taken on new meaning. Since that day on the cliff, now she taught others what Max had taught her, that true strength comes from connection, trust, and the courage to never give up. As the students began their climbs, Max settled beside Sarah, his head on her knee, Somewhere in Colorado, David was leading new tours with Bella at his side, fully recovered and back to the work he loved. They stayed in touch, sharing photos and stories. The bond formed that day connected them all, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when ordinary people choose to help each other. Sarah scratched Max behind the ears, feeling the familiar warmth of contentment. They'd saved each other that day on the cliff, and in doing so, they'd discovered that heroes come in all forms, sometimes with 2 legs, sometimes with 4, but always with hearts brave enough to take the leap. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the cliffs gold. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, but tonight Sarah and Max would go home to their quiet life. 2 souls who had found their perfect match in the most imperfect circumstances. If this story touched your heart, remember that courage and compassion can overcome any challenge. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves heartfelt stories like this one. Every view helps us bring more inspiring tales of the incredible bond between humans and their faithful companions.